Ethan lived in a quiet, remote cabin surrounded by trees, far from any busy towns. He enjoyed the peace, finding comfort in the stillness of nature. The nights were usually calm, but on this particular evening, a heavy storm raged outside. Rain poured down in sheets, and the wind howled through the trees, making the cabin creak. Ethan had just settled down with a book when he heard something strange, soft crying, almost like a baby's wail, but it didn't sound quite human. Curious and a little concerned, Ethan set down his book and walked to the front door. The cries continued, muffled by the storm. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was just the wind playing tricks on him. But then another soft cry came, more urgent this time. He couldn't ignore it. Ethan pulled on his coat and opened the door. The cold wind and rain hit him instantly, but he didn't care. His eyes scanned the dark, muddy ground outside his cabin. At first, he didn't see anything unusual. Then, just by the edge of the porch, something small moved. Squinting through the rain, Ethan stepped closer and saw a figure huddled near the porch. His heart skipped a beat. There in the mud was a thin, exhausted-looking alien woman, her body trembling from the cold. In her arms, she cradled a tiny bundle, and Ethan quickly realized that the soft cries were coming from within it, a baby. The alien mother, weak and barely able to hold herself up, lifted her head slowly. Her skin was a pale blue, and her large, glowing eyes showed desperation and fear. She didn't say anything, but her pleading expression spoke volumes. She was helpless, lost and terrified for her baby's safety. Ethan didn't think twice. He quickly knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he touched her arm, trying to reassure her. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'll help you." The alien woman shivered, barely able to nod. Ethan could see that she was too weak to speak, but her eyes filled with relief as she allowed herself to trust him. Carefully, he helped her to her feet and guided her inside his warm cabin, shielding the baby from the rain as best he could. Once inside, Ethan gently laid the alien woman on his couch, placing a blanket over her trembling form. He quickly checked the baby, who was bundled in strange but soft cloths. The child was small, barely able to open its eyes, but it seemed unharmed, just scared and hungry. Ethan moved to his kitchen, thinking fast. He didn't know what kind of food the alien mother or her baby needed, but he figured they had to be starving after being out in the storm for so long. He warmed some milk for the baby, hoping it would help. To his relief, the alien mother, though weak, gave a small nod of approval when he offered the bottle. The baby, tiny and fragile, drank the milk greedily, its soft cries quieting. Ethan sat beside the couch, watching the mother and child. He had so many questions, but it was clear that the alien woman needed rest. She looked exhausted, her eyes fluttering closed as she tried to stay awake. But soon she couldn't fight it anymore. She drifted into a deep sleep, holding her baby close. Ethan stayed by their side, wondering who she was, where she had come from, and what could have driven her to leave her baby at a stranger's door. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the cabin it was warm and safe. Ethan didn't know what lay ahead, but he had made a decision. He would protect them, no matter what. Ethan woke early the next morning, the storm from the night before now a distant memory. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow over the room. He glanced over at the couch where the alien mother lay, still asleep, her baby resting quietly in her arms. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, but Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. He moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast. He had no idea what the alien woman or her baby could eat, but he figured he'd try something gentle, some fruit and bread. As he set the food on the table, he heard movement behind him. The alien mother had woken up, her glowing eyes watching him cautiously. Ethan smiled, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. He slowly approached her with the plate of food, placing it gently on the table in front of her. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he was offering, but her hunger seemed to take over. With trembling hands, she took a small piece of the bread and nibbled at it. To Ethan's relief, she ate without any discomfort, and he watched as she fed small pieces to her baby as well. The baby made soft, cooing noises, its tiny hands reaching for more. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest. Something about this moment, caring for these strangers, felt deeply important. The alien mother looked up at Ethan, her eyes softening. She tried to speak, but her voice came out in weak, unfamiliar sounds. Ethan could tell she was struggling to communicate, so he spoke slowly and gently. "It's okay. You don't have to explain anything yet. You're safe here." Her eyes welled up with tears, a silent show of gratitude. Ethan wasn't sure what else to do, but he felt like he needed to learn more about her. He pointed to himself and said, "Ethan." Then he gestured to her, hoping she would understand. After a few moments, she placed a hand on her chest and said, in a soft, almost broken voice, "Zara." She pointed to the baby and whispered, "Lyra." Ethan smiled. "Zara and Lyra. It's nice to meet you both." Now that they had introduced themselves, Ethan realized he needed to figure out what to do next. He couldn't keep them here forever, not with Zara's enemies potentially looking for them. He needed more information, but the language barrier was a problem. An idea struck him. Ethan had an old friend, Dr. Lena Ross, who was an expert in alien biology and languages. She had worked with the government for years and had helped bridge communication gaps between humans and various alien species. Maybe she could help him understand Zara's situation better. Ethan knew it would be a risk to contact Lena, but he had no other choice. He stepped into the other room, away from Zara, and made a quick call to Lena, explaining the situation without too much detail. "Lena, I've come across an alien mother and her child. They need help, but I can't communicate with them well. Could you come here?" Lena, always one to help in a crisis, agreed to come as soon as she could. "I'll be there in a few hours, Ethan. Keep them safe until I arrive." Ethan hung up the phone, feeling a little more hopeful. He returned to Zara, who was now sitting up, holding her baby close. Her strength seemed to be returning slowly, but she still looked fearful. He sat down beside her, trying to reassure her with his presence. "A friend is coming," he said softly, pointing to the door. "She can help." Zara nodded weakly, but her eyes remained clouded with worry. Ethan knew she was scared of being found, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was hunting them. As the hours passed, Ethan kept glancing out the window, his mind racing with thoughts of how to keep them safe. He had taken them in without hesitation, but now he realized the gravity of his decision. Whoever Zara and her baby were running from, they wouldn't stop. Ethan had to be ready for whatever came next, no matter the cost. Ethan paced around the cabin, his mind racing with questions. He had taken in an alien mother and her baby without knowing who they were or what danger they might have brought to his doorstep. Zara had started to regain some strength, but she still hadn't explained why she had appeared at his door that stormy night. Ethan had a feeling that whatever she was running from was something big, something dangerous. Zara, meanwhile, sat quietly with her baby, Lyra, in her arms. Her eyes followed Ethan as he moved back and forth, concern etched into her features. She could sense his worry, but she didn't know how to ease it. Every time she tried to speak, the words caught in her throat, her alien language unfamiliar to him. Still, she appreciated the human's kindness. He had taken them in, given them warmth, food, and safety, even though he knew nothing about them. As Ethan tried to calm his nerves, a loud knock on the door broke the silence, startling both him and Zara. Ethan froze, exchanging a quick, worried glance with Zara. Could it be someone looking for her? His heart raced as he cautiously approached the door, peering through the small window to see who it was. To his relief, it was Dr. Lena Ross, his old friend. She stood on the porch, wearing her usual confident smile, though her eyes held curiosity and concern. Ethan quickly opened the door and ushered her inside. Lena stepped in, shaking off the chill of the outside air, her eyes immediately landing on Zara and her baby. "So this is the alien mother and child you were talking about," Lena said softly, her eyes scanning Zara with a mixture of awe and sympathy. "They've been through a lot, haven't they?" Ethan nodded, closing the door behind her. "Yeah, I found them outside during the storm. I don't know much about what's going on yet." Zara can't speak much English, but she's been trying to communicate. Lena approached Zara slowly, making sure not to scare her. She crouched down in front of the couch and gave Zara a kind smile. "Hello, Zara. My name is Lena. I'm here to help." Zara's eyes flicked between Lena and Ethan, her expression cautious but not hostile. She could sense that Lena was there to help, so she nodded and held Lyra a little closer. Lena glanced at the baby, then back at Zara, trying to figure out how to communicate with her. "I'm going to try a universal translator," Lena explained, pulling a small device from her bag. "It should help bridge the language gap. Let's see if we can learn more about why they're here." Lena activated the device, and after a few moments, it hummed to life. She spoke to Zara in her native language, and Zara's eyes widened in surprise. Finally, she could understand someone clearly. Slowly, Zara began to speak, her voice trembling as she explained her situation through the translator. Zara's story came out in pieces, but the message was clear. She had escaped from a powerful and dangerous alien faction. They had taken control of her planet, forcing her people into submission. Zara had been on the run for weeks, hiding with her baby, Lyra, in the hopes of finding a safe place. But no matter where she went, they kept tracking her down. Ethan and Lena listened carefully, their faces growing more serious with every word. Zara's people had once been peaceful, but the invaders had no mercy. They were ruthless, destroying everything in their path, and they wouldn't stop until they had full control. Lena glanced at Ethan, worry creeping into her voice. "This is bad, Ethan. If they're after her, they won't stop until they find her. We need to figure out a plan, fast." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "We have to keep her safe. They can't find her or the baby." Zara looked at them both, her eyes pleading. Through the translator, she said, "I don't want to put you in danger. If they find us, they'll hurt everyone." Ethan's face hardened with determination. "You're not alone anymore, Zara. We'll protect you. We'll find a way to keep you and Lyra safe." Lena agreed, though she knew it wouldn't be easy. "We'll need to stay ahead of them, Ethan. This isn't just any alien group. It sounds like they're highly organized. We have to prepare for whatever comes next." As the sun set outside the cabin, casting long shadows across the room, a heavy sense of dread filled the air. Ethan knew that the peace he had once enjoyed in his quiet home was now over. The storm that had brought Zara and her baby to his door was just the beginning. Now the real danger was closing in, and he had no idea how close it was. As the evening darkened into night, the atmosphere in Ethan's cabin grew tense. He sat at the small table with Lena, discussing what to do next. Zara rested on the couch, holding her baby close. She seemed to sense the weight of the conversation, even if she couldn't understand everything being said. "We need a plan, Lena," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "If those aliens are as dangerous as Zara says, They'll find us eventually. We have to be ready." Lena nodded, her mind racing. She was an expert in alien biology and languages. But this situation was far more dangerous than anything she had encountered before. "You're right. We can't stay here and hope they don't come. We need to stay ahead of them." The problem was, neither Ethan nor Lena knew much about Zara's enemies. All they had were bits of information, and it wasn't enough to fight back. Lena decided that the first step was to understand more about the aliens who were hunting Zara. "I have a few contacts in the Intergalactic Research Council," Lena said, pulling out a small handheld device. "They might have some intel on this group Sarah mentioned. Let me see what I can find." Ethan watched as Lena typed rapidly on the device, sending encrypted messages to her contacts. Time seemed to slow down as they waited for a response, the tension in the room palpable. Zara, sitting quietly with Lyra in her arms, looked at Ethan with a mixture of hope and fear. Ethan tried to give her a reassuring smile, but even he couldn't hide his concern. After what felt like hours, Lena's device pinged with a reply. She quickly opened the message, scanning the information. Her face paled as she read the details. This is worse than I thought," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The group Zara is running from, they're called the Scaleri. They're not just some small faction. They're a military force, powerful and well-organized. They've been expanding their territory for years, and it seems they've set their sights on Earth." Ethan's stomach dropped. So they're not just after Zara. They want more. Lena nodded grimly. "Exactly. Zara and Lyra were probably just lucky to escape when they did. The Scaleri don't leave survivors." Ethan glanced at Zara, who was watching them intently. The translator had been turned off, but it was clear she understood the gravity of the situation. He turned to Lena, a new determination in his eyes. "We can't let them get her or the baby. We need to protect them, and we need to warn others." Lena agreed. "We have to act fast. I have some old contacts who might be able to help us get Zara and Lyra off the planet, at least temporarily, until we figure out how to stop the Scaleri. But that'll take time." "We don't have much time," Ethan said, his voice firm. "What can we do right now?" Lena thought for a moment. "For now, we need to reinforce this place. We can set up defenses around the cabin, maybe some tech I can bring in from the research labs. It won't be much, but it'll buy us some time if the Scaleri find us." Ethan stood up from the table, his mind made up. "Let's do it. We'll reinforce the cabin tonight and figure out the rest later." Lena nodded, and they got to work. Ethan gathered supplies from his storage room, anything that could be used to fortify the windows and doors, while Lena made calls to her contacts, arranging for delivery of some tech that might help. Meanwhile, Zara watched them quietly, sensing the urgency in their actions. She didn't know what Ethan and Lena were planning, but she trusted them. They had already saved her once, and she had no choice but to hope they could do it again. As the hours passed, Ethan and Lena worked through the night, setting up basic defenses around the cabin. It wasn't much, but it was all they had for now. Every moment was filled with a sense of looming danger, but neither of them gave up. They had made a promise to protect Zara and Lyra, and they were going to keep it. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, the cabin looked a little more fortified. Ethan stood outside, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. He knew they had bought themselves some time, but it wouldn't be enough. The Scaleri were coming, it was only a matter of when. The morning brought with it a fragile sense of calm. The sun shone through the trees, casting soft light over the fortified cabin. Inside, Ethan and Lena sat exhausted but alert. They had spent the entire night reinforcing the cabin, and though it wasn't much, it made them feel a little safer. Zara and her baby, Lyra, were resting in a small room, the door left slightly ajar so Ethan could check on them. Ethan's mind raced as he stared out the window. He had never thought his life would involve protecting an alien mother and child from a galactic force. But here he was, preparing for a fight against something far more powerful than anything he'd ever faced. The idea of the Scaleri coming for Zara and Lyra gnawed at him. They were coming, there was no doubt about it. Suddenly, Lena's handheld device buzzed, breaking the silence. She quickly checked the message, her eyes narrowing. "They found us," she said in a hushed tone. "My contact just sent a warning. The Scaleri have picked up Zara's trail. They're tracking her signal, and they'll be here soon." Ethan felt his stomach drop, but he refused to let fear take over. "How much time do we have?" Lena bit her lip. "Not much. Maybe a few hours at most. We need to move fast." Ethan stood up, determination taking hold. "We can't outrun them, can we?" "No," Lena replied. "They're faster, and they have better technology. But we might be able to hold them off for a while if we use the defenses we've set up. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve with the tech that just arrived. It won't stop them completely, but it'll slow them down." Ethan nodded, already moving to check the barricades they had set up. Every second counted now. He glanced back at the small room where Zara and Lyra were resting. They had no idea how close danger was. "We need to make sure Zara and Lyra are ready to leave," Ethan said, his voice firm. "If things go south, we'll have to get them out of here." Lena agreed. "I'll talk to Zara, try to explain the situation. The translator should help her understand. But it's going to be tough. There's nowhere safe for her to go. If we can't hold them off here, we'll have to figure out an escape route on the fly." As Lena moved to speak with Zara, Ethan focused on preparing for the inevitable. He double-checked the traps they had set outside the cabin, basic but hopefully effective. They had rigged up some old defense drones Lena had brought over from her lab, along with some sensors to detect movement in the forest. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The minutes passed by agonizingly slow, each one filled with tension. Ethan could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, knowing that Zara and her baby's safety rested on their plan. He wasn't sure if they could survive an attack from the Scaleri, but he wasn't going to back down without a fight. Lena returned from the room, looking a bit shaken. "I told Zara everything. She understands, but she's terrified. I can't blame her. This isn't a fight she ever wanted to be a part of." Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "None of us did." Just as the weight of their situation settled heavily on them, the sensors outside the cabin beeped. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He rushed to the window and peered out into the forest. At first, he saw nothing, but then his eyes caught movement, shadows flitting between the trees. The Scaleri had arrived. "They're here," Ethan whispered. Lena joined him at the window, her face pale. "This is it. We need to be ready." Without another word, Ethan grabbed his rifle and positioned himself near the door. Lena moved to the control panel they had set up to trigger the traps and drones. The cabin was small, but they had the advantage of knowing the terrain, and they had done everything they could to prepare. Now it was time to see if it would be enough. Outside, the shadows of the Scaleri soldiers moved closer, their dark armor blending into the forest. Ethan took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. He had faced dangerous situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about protecting an innocent mother and her child. As the first Scaleri soldier stepped into the clearing, Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle. He glanced at Lena, who gave him a determined nod. They were ready. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched the Scaleri soldiers approach the cabin. Their movements were calculated, almost robotic, as they spread out to surround the small building. The sunlight reflected off their black armor, making them look like shadows from a nightmare. Ethan had never faced anything like this before, but he knew he couldn't let fear paralyze him. "They're coming," Lena whispered, her fingers hovering over the control panel. "Just give the signal when you're ready." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. "We have to buy enough time for Zara and Lyra to escape if it comes to that. We can't let them take them." Lena's expression was resolute. "We won't." The first Skilleri soldier stepped into the clearing in front of the cabin, its helmet scanning the area. Ethan held his breath, waiting for the right moment. He glanced over at Lena, who was ready to activate the traps. They had set everything up perfectly, but now it was a matter of timing. The second Skilleri soldier appeared, followed by a third. They moved with a quiet efficiency, completely unaware of the traps waiting for them. Ethan's heart raced as he counted the soldiers. 3, 4, 5. There were more than he had expected, and that meant they were heavily outnumbered. "Now," Ethan whispered urgently. Lena pressed a button on the control panel, and the first set of traps activated. Hidden wires snapped up from the ground, tangling around the legs of the leading Skilleri soldiers. They stumbled, caught off guard, as 2 defense drones flew out from behind the trees, firing small but precise laser beams at their armor. The element of surprise worked. 2 of the soldiers went down, temporarily immobilized by the tangled wires and drone fire. But the others quickly adapted. The remaining Skilleri raised their weapons, firing toward the cabin. Ethan ducked behind the window frame as a barrage of energy blasts hit the front of the cabin. Wood splintered, and the walls groaned under the impact. He fired back, aiming carefully at the advancing soldiers. One of his shots hit a Skilleri in the shoulder, causing it to fall back, but they kept coming. "Lena," Ethan shouted over the noise. "We need to trigger the next defense." Lena quickly tapped another button, activating the second wave of traps. Small explosive charges buried around the perimeter of the cabin detonated, sending shockwaves through the ground. The explosions disoriented the Skilleri, forcing them to slow down, but it was clear that the traps wouldn't hold them for long. "We're running out of time," Lena called out, her voice tense. Ethan fired another shot, taking down one of the Skilleri soldiers. But there were still too many of them. He could see them regrouping, their advanced armor protecting them from most of the damage. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the cabin as one of the energy blasts hit the front door, nearly blowing it off its hinges. Ethan's pulse quickened. They were getting too close. "We need to retreat," Ethan yelled. "Get Zara and Lyra." Lena nodded and ran toward the back room where Zara and her baby were hiding. Ethan stayed by the window, providing cover fire as best as he could. The Skilleri were relentless, their shots tearing through the cabin's defenses. Ethan knew they wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. Moments later, Lena emerged from the room with Zara, who was holding Lyra tightly against her chest. The fear in Zara's eyes was palpable, but there was also a look of determination. She knew what was at stake. "We need to get them out of here," Lena said, her voice urgent. "There's a back way through the woods. It might be our only chance." Ethan glanced out the window again. The Skilleri were closing in fast. If they didn't move now, they wouldn't get another opportunity. "Go," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I'll hold them off for as long as I can." Lena hesitated, but she knew there was no time to argue. She gently guided Zara toward the back door, whispering words of reassurance. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He fired another shot, hitting one of the Skilleri soldiers square in the chest. The soldier fell, but more were coming. Ethan could hear their footsteps now, pounding closer and closer. Just as Lena, Zora, and Lyra slipped out the back, the front door of the cabin gave way. The Scyllari had broken through. Ethan raised his rifle, his hand steady despite the fear gnawing at him. He had made a promise to protect Zora and her child, and he intended to keep it. The Scyllari entered the cabin, their weapons ready. Ethan knew he was outnumbered, but he wasn't going to give up. He fired the first shot. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as the first Scyllari soldier charged into the cabin. He ducked behind an overturned table and fired a shot, narrowly missing the creature. The cabin was now a battlefield, filled with smoke and the sound of energy blasts. The Scyllari were ruthless and efficient, but Ethan was determined to hold them off for as long as he could. Outside, Lena led Zora and the baby through the dense woods behind the cabin. The thick trees and undergrowth provided some cover, but Lena knew they had to move fast. Every second counted, and the sounds of the battle from the cabin reminded them of the danger they were still in. Zora stumbled slightly, clutching Lyra tightly to her chest. The infant was quiet, sensing the tension in the air. "Keep going," Lena urged her, helping Zora regain her balance. "We're almost there." But Zora's eyes were filled with worry. "What about Ethan? He's still back there." Lena didn't stop moving, but she cast a quick glance over her shoulder. "He's buying us time. He'll catch up. We just need to make it to the safe zone." Zara bit her lip, her heart heavy with concern. Ethan had risked everything to protect her and her child, and now he was fighting alone. But she knew Lena was right. They had to focus on survival for Lyra's sake. There was no room for hesitation. Back at the cabin, Ethan fired another shot, managing to take down one more Scyllari soldier. But he could feel the pressure mounting. His ammunition was running low, and the Scyllari were advancing, their armor deflecting most of his shots. He quickly glanced around the room, looking for anything that could buy him more time. His eyes landed on the backup generator. It wasn't powerful enough to take out the soldiers directly, but it might create enough of a distraction. Ethan quickly moved to the generator, fumbling with the wires. The Scyllari were almost on him, their footsteps heavy against the wooden floor. "Come on," Ethan muttered under his breath, sweat dripping down his forehead. He finally ripped the wires free and threw them toward the center of the room. Sparks flew as the generator overloaded, creating a burst of light and heat. The Scyllari stumbled back, momentarily blinded by the explosion. Ethan didn't waste a second. He dashed toward the back door, knowing this was his only chance to escape. The Scyllari were tough, but even they needed a moment to recover from the unexpected blast. Ethan could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he sprinted into the woods, following the path Lena had taken. As he ran, the sounds of pursuit grew quieter, but Ethan knew it wouldn't be long before the Scyllari regrouped and continued the chase. His only hope was to catch up to Lena and Zara before the enemy did. Up ahead, Lena and Zara were nearing the edge of the forest. The terrain was getting rougher, but Lena kept pushing forward, her determination unwavering. "We're almost at the old outpost," Lena said between breaths. "Once we're inside, we can activate the shields. It'll buy us more time." Zara nodded, though her exhaustion was evident. She glanced down at Lyra, who had finally fallen asleep in her arms. The baby's peaceful face was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around them. Zara couldn't help but feel a surge of protectiveness. She would do anything to keep her child safe. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind them made both women freeze. Lena immediately raised her weapon, prepared to defend them. But then through the trees, Ethan appeared, breathing heavily but very much alive. Zara let out a sigh of relief. "Ethan." Lena lowered her weapon, a small smile of relief on her face. "You made it." Ethan nodded, trying to catch his breath. "Barely. The Skilleri are regrouping. They'll be coming after us any minute." "We're close to the outpost," Lena said quickly. "We need to get inside and activate the shields." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing. "Then let's move. We don't have much time." Together, they hurried toward the old outpost hidden deep in the woods. It was a small abandoned structure, but it had a shield system that could hold off the Skilleri for a while, at least long enough for them to figure out their next move. As they approached the outpost, Lena quickly worked on the control panel to power it up. The old systems groaned to life, and the shield generator hummed with energy. "We're in," Lena said, her voice filled with both relief and urgency. "But this will only hold them off for so long." Ethan glanced at Zara and Lyra. "It'll have to do. For now, we need to come up with a plan. We can't keep running forever." Zara nodded, clutching her baby closer. "We'll figure something out. Together." The group stood inside the outpost, knowing the next challenge was just around the corner. But for now they had each other, and that was enough to keep fighting. Inside the old outpost, the atmosphere was tense. The shield generator hummed, casting a faint blue glow over the group as it activated, creating a temporary barrier between them and the approaching Skilleri. Ethan, Lena, Zara, and baby Lyra huddled together, knowing they were safe for now, but also aware that time was running out. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced around the small outpost. It had been abandoned for years, the equipment old and rusted, but it was all they had. "This shield won't hold forever," he muttered, pacing back and forth. Lena, who had been studying the control panel, nodded in agreement. "The power cells are depleted. We might have an hour, maybe two, before the shield fails." Zara sat on the floor, gently rocking Lyra, who was still asleep. Her face was a mix of exhaustion and fear, but she was determined to stay strong for her child. "What do we do when it fails? We can't outrun the Skilleri forever." Ethan stopped pacing and knelt beside Zara, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We won't have to. We're not running anymore. It's time we fight back." Zara's eyes widened in surprise. "Fight back? But how? The Skilleri are relentless." Lena stood up, a determined look in her eyes. "Ethan's right. Running isn't an option anymore. But this outpost may have more to offer than we think." She gestured toward the control panel. "The systems here may be old, but they still have some power left. There's a chance we can use the outpost's defense mechanisms." Ethan frowned. "Defense mechanisms? I thought this place was abandoned." "It is," Lena confirmed. "But back when it was operational, it was used as a research facility. It had basic defense systems in place, energy cannons, traps, things like that. If we can reactivate them, we might be able to hold off the Skilleri long enough to signal for help." Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. And how long would it take to get the defense systems online? Lena hesitated. "It won't be easy. The systems are outdated, and I'll need to reroute power from the shield to activate them. We'd be vulnerable while I do it." Zara looked from Lena to Ethan, her heart pounding. "What if it doesn't work?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression firm. "It has to work. We've come this far, and I'm not going to let them take you or Lyra." Zara's eyes softened, and she nodded, trusting Ethan's resolve. "Okay, what do you need us to do?" Lena moved to the control panel, pulling out a set of tools from her bag. "I'll need to start rerouting the power now. Ethan, you'll need to watch the perimeter. If the Skilleri make it past the shield while I'm working, we're going to need a backup plan." Ethan nodded and grabbed his rifle, checking the ammo. "Got it. I'll keep them busy." As Lena worked on the control panel, Ethan made his way to the entrance of the outpost, positioning himself to get a clear view of the forest beyond the shield. The Skillery hadn't arrived yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time. He adjusted his rifle and took a deep breath, preparing himself for the inevitable fight. Inside, Zara kept Lyra close, trying to stay calm as Lena worked furiously on the control panel. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the low hum of the shield and the occasional spark from Lena's tools. Minutes passed like hours, and the pressure mounted. Lena's hands moved swiftly, her face set in concentration. "Almost there," she muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead. "Just a little more." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the forest. Ethan tensed, his heart racing as he scanned the trees. Movement. Shadows. The Skillery were here. "They're coming," Ethan called out, gripping his rifle tightly. Lena didn't look up from her work. "I need 5 more minutes. Just hold them off." Ethan's mind raced as the first Skillery soldier appeared at the edge of the forest, its eyes glowing menacingly in the dim light. Ethan aimed and fired, the shot hitting the creature in the chest, but it barely slowed down. "They're tougher than I thought," Ethan muttered, firing again as more Skillery emerged from the trees. He had to keep them at bay, but his ammo was limited, and the shield wouldn't hold much longer. Inside, Zara watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding in her chest. She held Lyra close, whispering words of comfort as the baby stirred in her sleep. "Come on, Lena," Ethan muttered under his breath, firing shot after shot. "We need those defenses now." And then with a sudden hum, the outpost lights flickered, and the defense systems roared to life. Energy cannons popped out of hidden panels in the walls, locking onto the Skillery soldiers and opening fire. Ethan let out a sigh of relief. That's more like it. The defense systems fired with precision, energy bolts ripping through the air and striking the advancing Skillery. Each hit caused a ripple of light as their armor absorbed some of the impact, but the relentless firepower of the outpost cannons began to take its toll. One by one, the Skillery soldiers stumbled and fell, their hulking forms crashing to the ground. Ethan stood at the entrance, rifle in hand, scanning the battlefield with sharp eyes. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, even with the defense systems activated. There were more of them, hiding in the shadows of the forest, waiting for an opening. The shield around the outpost flickered weakly, and he knew it wouldn't last much longer. Inside the outpost, Lena wiped her brow and exhaled deeply, her fingers still hovering over the control panel. "That should buy us some time," she muttered, glancing over her shoulder at Zara and baby Lyra. "But we're not out of the woods yet." Zara, holding Lyra close to her chest, nodded silently. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't let go of the small spark of hope that had been ignited by Ethan and Lena's determination. They had fought so hard to protect her and her child, and she wasn't about to give up now. Outside, the Skillery regrouped, their numbers swelling as reinforcements arrived. Ethan's heart sank at the sight of them. These new Skillery were larger, their armor thicker, and they moved with a terrifying speed. The defense systems continued to fire, but the sheer number of enemies was overwhelming. "They're pushing through," Ethan called out, firing another round from his rifle as 2 Skillery charged toward the outpost. The energy cannon swiveled and blasted one of them, but the second kept coming, its claws outstretched, eyes glowing with hatred. Ethan braced himself, ready for impact, but just before the Skillery reached him, there was a loud explosion. The ground shook, and the creature was thrown backward in a cloud of smoke and debris. Lena had activated one of the outpost's final defenses, an energy mine buried just outside the perimeter. "That was close," she breathed, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the settings on the control panel. but we're running out of tricks." Ethan took a step back, his mind racing. They couldn't hold out forever. The Scaleri were relentless, and eventually the shield would fail, the defense systems would run out of power, and they would be overrun. But then something unexpected happened. In the distance, beyond the trees, a strange sound echoed through the air. It was low at first, almost like a hum, but it quickly grew louder, more distinct. The Scaleri paused, their movements slowing as they tilted their heads, listening. It was as if they recognized the sound and feared it. "What's that?" Zara whispered, her eyes wide with confusion. Ethan listened carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that sound. It was the unmistakable hum of an approaching ship, multiple ships, in fact. He looked up, his breath catching in his throat as he saw them. A fleet of human vessels descending from the sky, their engines glowing brightly as they moved in formation. "They're here," Ethan said, a mix of relief and disbelief in his voice. "The reinforcements, they made it." The Scaleri, sensing the shift in power, began to retreat, their snarls turning to growls of frustration. The human ships opened fire, their weapons far more advanced than anything the Scaleri had faced before. Within minutes, the once mighty Scaleri force was reduced to nothing more than scattered remnants, fleeing into the forest. Lena, equally exhausted but smiling, approached Ethan, her eyes reflecting the glow of the ships above. "You did it, Ethan. You held them off long enough." Zara, holding Lyra close, stepped forward. Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude and hope. "You saved us," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "Both of you." Ethan looked at Zara and smiled. "We saved each other. That's what humans do. We don't give up on each other, no matter how hard things get." The ships landed outside the outpost, and soldiers emerged, rushing to secure the area and assist the survivors. Ethan, Lena, Zara, and baby Lyra stood together, watching as the soldiers moved efficiently, clearing away the last remnants of the Scaleri threat. One of the commanding officers approached Ethan and Lena, nodding in approval. "You held out longer than anyone thought possible. You're both heroes." Ethan shook his head. "We're just people trying to do what's right." The officer smiled. "That's what makes you heroes." As the sun began to rise, casting a golden light over the forest, Ethan looked at Zara and Lyra. They were safe, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt hopeful. Together, they would face whatever challenges came next, but they knew they could survive anything, as long as they stood together.